And thank you for joining the Purposeful Pod. Cherie and I were talking about podcasts and podcast guesting, and realized that there are a lot of people who want to be podcast guests, but may not know what it means, or may actively be participating as a guest on multiple podcasts, but have never been given any really great context to make sure that when they're showing up, you're showing up with the best version of yourself and in a way that you're truly creating content that you can repurpose. And since Scotty and team are so busy working on ways of letting us bring in video so that they can create and use the AI to create small clips, we thought it might be fun to give some tips and tricks about how to be a good podcast guest, so that you're serving the audience of the podcast host, but that you're really getting something that you can use for your own amplification, because that's really what it's all about. As a podcast guest, you want to get things that you can use for yourself. So in this pod, we're going to cover 4 different videos. The first one that we're starting today, we're getting ready for recording a podcast. Next one, we'll talk about knowing your stuff. Third one, we'll dig in really deep into the idea of your personal narrative. And the fourth and final one, etiquette and best practices, sort of bringing it all together. And again, how to use it over time to amplify your own message, to present yourself as a thought leader, an expert, and position yourself more effectively. So today, first and foremost, getting ready for the recording. There are a bazillion podcasts out there. And if you are actively looking, or you have somebody actively looking on your behalf on how to get you into those podcasts, it can be overwhelming. But there are really kind of 3 main things that you need to do when you're looking and starting, right? What is the podcast about? Who is the audience? And what message, what do I have to add to that topic or that theme? So when you get to understand the theme, the purpose, and the audience of the podcast, you should be able to know how to position yourself as a guest who's going to add value. Make sure that you listen to an episode or 2. If it's a video podcast, watch an episode or 2, get a feel for the tone, the pace, the topics that are covered, so that when you're on, you're adding value to that audience and positioning yourself in the best possible light. To be able to do that, then you need to make sure that you have your environment ready, right? Understand your equipment. Do you have a good microphone? Do you have a good camera? Do you test your audio to know how you sound? Is there an echo in your room? Is it crackly? Is the volume not right? Get familiar with that. Understand with your camera, can you zoom in, zoom out, reframe, so that when you're sitting side by side in the box next to the podcast host, that if they are showing a nice area, kind of the way that I am right now, that you're positioned in the center of your camera and have some things going on around you, and that you're not so close that it feels like you're a talking head, and that you're so much bigger or more overwhelming than the host themselves. I'll be really honest, us podcast hosts are typically the ones who are good about reframing the shots to match our guests. But if as a guest, you are aware of how to do that for yourself, it's helpful. The last little thought for today in that pre-interview idea is software. Some shows record on Zoom. Some use sites like StreamYard. If you are unfamiliar with how that is being run, go in a little bit early to make sure that you've tested that. If you're in something like StreamYard or any of the others that are website based, that you make sure that your camera turns on appropriately, your microphone connects properly, and that you are ready to go at the top of the recording time, so that you are prepared and you show up ready to rock and roll. That's the gist of being able and how we get ready for the podcast. I know it sounds silly, but even for me, day in and day out, my camera kind of changes how it's framed and does all of those things. Every Monday, I have to sort of reset myself to make sure things are working. So it may sound like it's very fundamental, but it is important that we start with the basics so that we show up well. In the next conversation that I share with you, we'll talk about being able to know your stuff. That video will come out in a day or 2. Thanks so much.